I still remember the first time I saw her. It was a late spring afternoon, and the sunlight danced on the edges of her hair as she laughed at something her friend said. There was an energy about her, like the world bent a little closer just to catch a glimpse. I never believed in love at first sight, but that day, everything I thought I knew about myself shifted. Her name was Rachel. We met through a mutual friend at an open mic night, of all places. I was there, nervously strumming a guitar and mumbling my way through a poorly rehearsed cover of an old folk song. She was sitting in the front row, the only one clapping louder than polite decorum demanded. Afterward, she approached me, her green eyes alight with curiosity. "You play guitar like someone who's just discovered it's possible to love," she teased, grinning. "Is that a compliment?" I stammered, feeling heat rise to my cheeks. She laughed, a sound that instantly felt like home. "It is. I'm Rachel." From that moment, we were inseparable. Our love story was the kind that friends teased us about, two people wrapped up so tightly in each other that the outside world seemed to blur. We shared everything, hopes, fears, the last bite of dessert. Life became an endless loop of lazy Sunday mornings, spontaneous road trips, and whispered dreams under starry skies. Neither of us had a perfect past. Before we met, we were both champions of free love, swearing off commitment like it was a bad case of the flu. But something about our connection shifted all of that. Suddenly, there was no one else in the world but us. It wasn't just passion, it was a partnership, a friendship, a bond deeper than anything I'd imagined. We worked from home together, our desks side by side, stealing glances and inside jokes all day. Evenings were reserved for long walks, theater dates, or simply lying on the couch debating the merits of different movie endings. The years passed in a blur of happiness and unspoken promises. And through it all, Rachel was my rock, my muse, my everything. The first few months with Rachel were like stepping into an entirely new world. It wasn't just love, it was discovery, every day revealing something about her that I hadn't known before and couldn't wait to understand. We didn't just date, we collided. From that first conversation after the open mic night, I couldn't resist the gravitational pull she had on me. Our relationship evolved quickly, but it wasn't rushed, it was natural, as if the universe had been holding its breath, waiting for us to meet. I had known plenty of people before her, but Rachel made me feel seen in a way no one else ever had. Our first official date set the tone for everything that followed, unexpected, vivid, and unforgettable. I'd planned something simple, coffee at a quiet cafe downtown. But Rachel, being Rachel, had other ideas. She showed up, wearing a bright yellow sundress, and declared, "I hope you're not too attached to that latte. There's a carnival in the park, and I'm dragging you there." I couldn't say no to her. 10 minutes later, I was holding her hand as we wove through the crowd, the air filled with the smell of fried dough and the distant jingle of carousel music. She insisted we ride the Ferris wheel, and when we reached the top, she turned to me, grinning. "Close your eyes," she said. "Why?" I asked, laughing nervously. "Just do it." I did. And when I opened them, she was leaning in, her face inches from mine. Our first kiss wasn't dramatic or planned, it was stolen, high above the world, with the wind brushing past us. From that moment, it was like we were writing our own romantic comedy, one scene at a time. We had a rhythm together, like two parts of the same melody. We'd stay up late talking about everything and nothing, our conversations veering from the existential to the ridiculous. She was the only person who could get me to admit my childhood dream of becoming a magician, something I'd buried deep out of embarrassment. And in return, she told me about her secret collection of vintage snow globes, which she claimed were tiny worlds trapped in glass. Rachel had this way of making the ordinary extraordinary. Grocery shopping became an adventure. Laundry day turned into a dance-off in the living room. She had this knack for finding beauty in places I'd never thought to look, and she pulled me into that world with her. It wasn't all sunshine and roses, though. We had our share of quirks and differences. Rachel was spontaneous, a whirlwind of energy and impulse. I was methodical, the type to research the best toaster for 3 days before buying one. She teased me about my need for structure, while I marveled at her ability to throw caution to the wind. There were little arguments, sure, about whose turn it was to do the dishes, or why she insisted on wearing shoes in the house. But we always found our way back to each other. She had a way of disarming me with a smile, making me laugh even when I wanted to stay mad. One night, after a particularly silly fight about the thermostat, she was always freezing, I was always sweating, she climbed into bed and tucked herself under my arm. "You know," she whispered, "it's not just about being the same person. It's about loving the differences, too." That was Rachel, simple words that carried profound weight. We built a life together, brick by brick. Even though we weren't married yet, it felt like we had the kind of commitment that couldn't be shaken. We worked from home, our desks side by side in the little apartment we'd found together. Some days, I'd glance over and catch her in the middle of typing, her face scrunched up in concentration. Other days, she'd catch me staring and throw a crumpled paper at my head, laughing as I pretended to be offended. Our evenings were sacred. After dinner, we'd take long walks through the park near our place, the kind of strolls that felt timeless. We'd talk about everything, our plans for the future, our childhood memories, even silly hypotheticals like, if you could be any animal, what would you be? Her answer, a sea otter. Mine, a hawk. She thought that was boring. There was no place for lies, no room for betrayal. Or so I thought. In those early stages, it felt impossible that anything could ever come between us. After a year of dating, Rachel and I decided it was time to take the plunge. We were moving in together. It wasn't a difficult decision, we already spent most of our time at each other's places, and the thought of having a shared space felt like the next chapter of our story. We found our first apartment in a quiet neighborhood just outside the city. It wasn't much, 600 square feet with creaky floorboards and a kitchen so small that if we both tried to cook, one of us ended up in the hallway. But to us, it was perfect. We called it our little shoebox, and it quickly became a home. The move-in day was chaos. I remember wrestling a couch up 3 flights of stairs while Rachel stood at the top, laughing and pretending to be my foreman. Once everything was finally inside, we collapsed onto the couch, surrounded by unpacked boxes. Rachel pulled out a bottle of cheap champagne she'd hidden in her bag. "To new beginnings," she said, raising her glass. "To not having to pay 2 rents anymore," I joked, clinking my glass against hers. We spent that first night eating takeout on the floor because the dining table hadn't been assembled yet. Rachel insisted on lighting candles to set the mood, even though they were the only source of light since we'd forgotten to buy lamps. It was messy and unorganized, but it was ours. The apartment quickly filled with memories. There was the time Rachel decided to surprise me with a new paint color for the living room. I came home to find her covered in splatters of a bright teal hue that she later admitted was a mistake. Or the time I tried to fix the leaky faucet in the bathroom and ended up flooding the floor. We laughed through every mishap, and somehow, those moments made the place feel even more like home. But as much as we loved that little apartment, it wasn't long before we outgrew it. We both worked from home, and our desks in the corner of the living room started to feel cramped. Rachel's dream had always been to have a house, a place with a garden, where she could grow flowers and I could finally get that dog I'd been talking about since we met. After months of searching, we found it. A cozy, 2-bedroom house on the edge of town with a picket fence straight out of a postcard. It had everything we wanted, a sunny kitchen, a little porch, and, most importantly, a yard big enough for a dog. The first time we walked through the house, Rachel was already mentally decorating. "This room will be my office," she said, pointing to a small room with a window overlooking the garden. "And the porch is perfect for morning coffee." I just nodded, knowing she'd already made up her mind. By the time we left, she was practically bouncing with excitement. Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference. This is it, she said, grabbing my hand. This is the one. Buying the house was the most adult thing we'd ever done, and it felt surreal. I still remember the day we got the keys. Rachel unlocked the door, pushed it open, and then turned to me with a wide grin. "Carry me over the threshold," she declared. "What? We're not married." I laughed. "Doesn't matter. It's tradition," she said, leaping into my arms before I had a chance to protest. I nearly dropped her, but we both ended up laughing so hard that it didn't matter. Moving in was a whirlwind. We spent the first night in sleeping bags because the bed frame was still in pieces. Rachel insisted on making a fancy dinner to celebrate, which turned out to be spaghetti with Jared sauce. We ate it on paper plates in the middle of the empty living room, surrounded by boxes. It was perfect. The house quickly became our sanctuary. Rachel threw herself into gardening, transforming the backyard into a riot of color with wildflowers and roses. She even built a little vegetable patch, though her tomatoes were more enthusiastic than her carrots. I focused on the inside, turning the spare bedroom into a library/guest room and installing shelves that Rachel insisted were slightly crooked. They weren't. We hosted our first Thanksgiving there, cramming family into every available chair and laughing as Rachel tried to defrost the turkey in the bathtub because the fridge was too small. It was chaotic and loud and full of love, just like our life together. The house wasn't just a place to live, it was a reflection of us. Every corner held a memory, every room echoed with laughter. It was where we planned our future, where we dreamed of what was next. One of the things that made our relationship so special was how effortlessly our lives blended together. Rachel and I worked from home, which meant we spent nearly every waking moment side by side. While other couples might have worried about too much togetherness, we thrived on it. Our home office was a testament to our differences. My desk was a fortress of organization, neatly stacked files, labeled folders, and a coaster for my coffee cup. Rachel's side, on the other hand, was chaos. Sticky notes covered her monitor, and a precarious tower of books loomed over her keyboard. She claimed it was a creative system. I called it a disaster zone. Despite the clutter, she was brilliant. Rachel worked as a freelance graphic designer, crafting everything from logos to book covers. I could often hear her muttering to herself as she fiddled with layouts or muting her music for a sudden burst of inspiration. I worked in tech consulting, managing projects that required precision and focus. Our work styles were opposites, but we balanced each other perfectly. During the day, we developed an unspoken rhythm. I'd brew the first pot of coffee while Rachel made a quick breakfast, usually toast or yogurt. We'd settle into our respective desks, exchanging the occasional quip or playful jab. If one of us hit a snag, the other was always ready to listen, to offer advice, or just to be a sounding board. Lunches were our breather. Rachel often experimented with recipes, whipping up grilled cheese with fancy toppings or cobbling together quirky salads. She'd joke that she was elevating leftovers. Sometimes, we'd eat at the dining table, other times at our desks if work was hectic. The real magic happened after the workday ended. At around 6 p.m., we had a tradition, evening walks. No matter how stressful the day had been, those walks were non-negotiable. We'd lace up our sneakers, grab a water bottle, and head to the nearby park. The park had a little path that wound around a pond, framed by tall oak trees. In the spring, the air smelled like blooming flowers, and in the fall, the crunch of leaves underfoot was like a soft melody. We'd walk hand in hand, talking about everything and nothing. Rachel had a knack for turning even mundane topics into adventures. One evening, she decided we should name the ducks in the pond. "That one's Gregory," she said, pointing to a particularly fat duck waddling toward us. He looks like he's in charge. Fine, I said, playing along. But the one flapping its wings is obviously Beatrice. She's trying to take over. We spent the rest of the walk weaving an elaborate story about Gregory and Beatrice's power struggle, complete with alliances and betrayals among the other ducks. By the time we got home, we were laughing so hard we could barely breathe. On quieter nights, we'd walk in comfortable silence, watching the sky shift from pink to orange as the sun set. Rachel loved to point out constellations, even if she sometimes got them wrong. "That's the Big Dipper," she'd say confidently, pointing at a random cluster of stars. "Pretty sure that's not even a constellation," I'd reply, grinning. "Shoo," she'd say, swatting my arm. "Let me live my truth." Back at home, the evenings were a mix of relaxation and routine. We'd cook dinner together, Rachel handling the creative side while I chopped and cleaned up after her. Sometimes, we'd turn on music and dance around the kitchen, her laughter filling the space as I clumsily tried to keep up. After dinner, we'd settle on the couch for a movie or a few episodes of a show. Rachel had a weakness for romantic comedies, while I leaned toward sci-fi, so we'd alternate choices. I still remember her making fun of me for tearing up during The Notebook, even though she cried harder during Interstellar. We made our little world a sanctuary, a place where we felt safe and loved. We didn't need extravagant plans or grand gestures, our everyday life was filled with tiny moments of joy. Whether it was Rachel doodling silly sketches on post-it notes to leave on my desk, or me sneaking her favorite chocolate bar into the grocery cart, we built a life that felt whole. But in hindsight, maybe we spent so much time focusing on the little joys that we missed the subtle shifts, the small distances that crept in like shadows on a sunny day. It all started with an email. A prestigious tech company, one of those names you drop in conversations to sound impressive, reached out to me about a temporary consulting project. They needed someone to streamline a major system overhaul at their headquarters. It was a career-making opportunity, the kind of thing that could put me on the map professionally. The catch? It was a month-long on-site project, halfway across the country. At first, I didn't take it seriously. Sure, the offer was flattering, but leaving home for an entire month? The idea seemed ridiculous. Rachel and I had built a life where we were practically glued at the hip. I couldn't imagine waking up in a sterile hotel room instead of next to her. Besides, the thought of stepping away from our day-to-day rhythm felt daunting, like disrupting a perfectly orchestrated symphony. But as the days passed, the idea started to nag at me. The company was persistent, following up with calls and even scheduling a virtual meeting to lay out the details. The role was challenging but exciting, exactly the kind of work I'd been itching to take on. Still, the idea of leaving Rachel made me hesitate. I remember the night I told her about the offer. We were in the kitchen, Rachel slicing vegetables for dinner while I leaned against the counter, fidgeting with my phone. "So, there's this job thing," I started, my voice casual but my stomach tight with nerves. She looked up, her brow furrowed. "Job thing? What kind of thing?" I explained the offer, laying out the details as clearly as I could. I was half expecting her to scoff or wave it off, but instead, she set down the knife and crossed her arms, studying me. "That sounds big," she said. "Yeah," I admitted. "But it's a month away. I don't think I can do that to us." Rachel's expression softened, and she took a step closer, resting a hand on my arm. "Babe, you've been talking about wanting to take on bigger projects for years. This could open doors for you. Why are you so hesitant?" "Because I don't want to leave you," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "What's the point of an opportunity like this if I'm miserable the whole time?" Her lips quirked into a small smile, but there was a seriousness in her eyes. "You're not going to be miserable. You're going to do amazing work and come home with stories to tell. We'll FaceTime every day. And when you get back, we'll celebrate. This isn't about leaving, it's about building something for our future. I shook my head. It's just a month. Does it really matter that much? It's not about the month, she said firmly. It's about showing people what you're capable of. Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference. You've worked so hard, and you deserve this. Don't let fear hold you back. Rachel's words stuck with me. She had always been my biggest cheerleader, the person who saw potential in me even when I doubted myself. I still hesitated for a few more days, but eventually, her encouragement tipped the scales. I accepted the offer. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. The company sent over a packed itinerary, and Rachel helped me shop for new business attire, claiming my wardrobe needed a serious upgrade if I was going to be rubbing elbows with tech giants. She even slipped a little note into my suitcase before I left: "Remember, you've got this. And when in doubt, imagine me yelling at you to keep going." The morning I left, Rachel drove me to the airport. We held hands the whole way, not saying much but exchanging little glances that said more than words could. At the terminal, she wrapped her arms around me tightly, her head resting against my chest. "Call me as soon as you land," she said. "I will," I promised, kissing her forehead. As I walked through the security line, I looked back to see her standing there, her arms crossed over her chest, smiling bravely even as her eyes glistened. The plane ride was surreal. I spent the whole time oscillating between excitement and a deep, aching sense of homesickness. But I kept reminding myself of Rachel's words: this was about our future. When I first arrived at the company's headquarters, it felt like stepping onto another planet. Everything was sleek and modern: glass walls, open workspaces, and a cafeteria that looked more like a gourmet restaurant. The team was welcoming but intense, and the project quickly proved to be as challenging as they'd promised. The workdays were long, often stretching from early morning to well past sunset. I was in constant meetings, writing reports, and troubleshooting issues, and by the time I got back to the hotel each night, I was too drained to do much more than collapse onto the bed. Rachel and I had promised to talk every day, and we kept that promise, at least at first. Our video calls became my lifeline, the one thing keeping me tethered to home. I'd prop my phone against a pillow and see her face light up the screen, her smile a balm for the stress of the day. "How's my tech genius?" she'd ask, her voice full of warmth. "Exhausted," I'd reply, rubbing my eyes. "But getting through it." She'd tell me about her day, how the garden was thriving, how she'd tried a new recipe that looked better than it tasted, how she'd caught our neighbor's dog digging up the flower beds again. I'd listen, laugh, and let the sound of her voice remind me why I was doing all of this. But as the weeks went on, something started to shift. At first, it was subtle. I'd call a little later than planned because a meeting ran long, or I'd zone out during our conversations, my mind stuck on a problem from work. Rachel noticed, of course, she always did. "You seem distracted," she said one evening, tilting her head as she studied me through the screen. "Sorry," I said quickly. "It's just been a crazy day. There's this system bug we can't figure out, and it's driving me nuts." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's okay. I get it." Except it wasn't okay. The calls became shorter, less frequent. Some nights, I was too tired to call at all and would send a quick text instead: "Sorry, late night. Miss you." Rachel always responded with something sweet: "Miss you too. Get some rest." But I could feel the distance growing. The time difference didn't help. By the time I finished my day, Rachel was getting ready for bed, and our conversations often felt rushed. She'd ask how I was holding up, and I'd give her the same vague answers: busy, tired, getting through it. I didn't realize how much I was shutting her out until it was too late. One night, about 3 weeks in, she called me before I had a chance to reach out. I answered, expecting the usual warm greeting, but her tone was strained. "Hey," she said. Are we, okay? I blinked, caught off guard. What do you mean? It's just. I don't know. You've been so distant lately. I know you're busy, but it feels like you're shutting me out. My chest tightened. I'm not shutting you out, Rachel. It's just, this job is a lot. I'm trying to juggle everything. I know, she said softly. And I'm proud of you. But it feels like. I don't know, like you're slipping away. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to reassure her, to tell her everything was fine, but the truth was, I wasn't sure. The pressure of the job, the physical distance, the exhaustion, it was all taking a toll, and I didn't know how to bridge the gap that had formed between us. We'll be fine, I said, forcing a smile. It's just a rough patch. I'll be home soon, and things will go back to normal. But even as I said the words, they felt hollow. The last week of the project was the hardest. The workload was relentless, and the calls with Rachel became more strained. She seemed more reserved, her usual warmth replaced by a quiet unease. I told myself it was just the distance, that we'd reconnect once I got home, but a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. When the final day of the project arrived, I felt a mix of relief and dread. I packed my bags, said my goodbyes to the team, and boarded the plane back home, eager to see Rachel but unsure of what awaited me. I told myself everything would be fine, that we'd pick up where we left off. When I walked through the front door, suitcase in hand, I expected to feel relief, a sense of homecoming that would wash away the stress of the past month. But instead, I was greeted by a strange, heavy silence. The house looked the same, smelled the same, like fresh laundry and a faint hint of lavender from Rachel's favorite diffuser, but something felt off. Rachel was in the kitchen when I arrived, her back to me as she stirred a pot on the stove. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice light. She turned, her expression neutral. "Oh, you're back." There was no rush to greet me, no excited hug or kiss. It wasn't like her. Rachel had always been the kind of person who made homecomings feel like celebrations, even if I'd only been gone a day. "I missed you," I said, stepping closer and wrapping my arms around her. Her body was stiff, her embrace half-hearted. "Missed you too," she said, but her tone lacked warmth. I pulled back, studying her face. She looked tired, her eyes duller than I remembered. "You okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine," she said, turning back to the stove. "Dinner's almost ready." I let it go, chalking it up to exhaustion or a long day. Maybe she just needed time to adjust to me being back. I unpacked my suitcase while she finished cooking, trying to shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in my chest. Dinner was quiet, almost uncomfortably so. We used to fill meals with laughter and chatter, trading stories about our day, but that night felt different. I told her about the project, how intense it had been but ultimately rewarding. She nodded, asking a few polite questions, but her enthusiasm felt forced. When I asked how things had been for her, she shrugged. "Same as usual. Nothing much to tell." "Come on," I pressed gently. "A whole month and nothing interesting happened?" She sighed, setting her fork down. "I don't know what you want me to say, okay? It was just a month. I got through it." Her words stung more than I wanted to admit. "I didn't mean to upset you," I said carefully. "I just thought. I don't know. I thought you'd be happy I'm back." "I am happy," she said, her voice clipped. But she didn't look happy. The rest of the evening felt strained. After dinner, Rachel retreated to the couch with her laptop, scrolling through emails while I cleaned up the dishes. Normally, we'd do it together, turning it into a little ritual, her washing, me drying, but she seemed content to leave me to it. As I loaded the dishwasher, I caught myself glancing at her, searching for some sign of the Rachel I knew. But she seemed distant, her focus elsewhere. When I finally sat down next to her, she didn't move closer or rest her head on my shoulder like she usually did. Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference. Instead, she stayed curled up on the opposite end of the couch, her laptop balanced on her knees. "Do you want to watch something?" I asked, hoping to bridge the gap. "Not really," she said without looking up. The silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. I wanted to ask her what was wrong, to push for answers, but I was afraid of what she might say. Instead, I let the silence win. That night in bed, the distance felt even more pronounced. We lay side by side, but it might as well have been miles. I reached for her hand under the covers, but she didn't squeeze back the way she always had. "Good night," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "Good night," I replied, staring at the ceiling long after she'd turned away. The next morning, I woke up early, hoping to make her favorite breakfast, pancakes with fresh berries and whipped cream. It was my way of trying to bring some normalcy back, to remind her how much I'd missed her. But when she came into the kitchen, she didn't smile at the sight of the pancakes or tease me about making a mess like she used to. She just muttered a quiet, "Thanks," and ate quickly before disappearing into her home office. The unease I'd felt the night before only deepened. Something was wrong, but I didn't know how to fix it. The month that followed my return home felt like riding a seesaw. One moment, Rachel and I were laughing together like nothing had changed, the next, it was like we were strangers living under the same roof. At first, I tried to tell myself it was just an adjustment period. A month apart was bound to leave some ripples, right? But those ripples felt more like waves, constantly shifting the balance of our relationship. There were good days, moments that reminded me of how things used to be. Like the night I came home from running errands to find Rachel in the kitchen, flour smudged on her cheek as she attempted to bake banana bread. She turned to me with an exasperated sigh. "Why do all these recipes act like baking is easy? This batter is laughing at me," she said, holding up a lumpy mixture. I laughed, stepping closer. "Let me help." We ended up covered in flour, the banana bread barely edible, but for a couple of hours, it felt like we were us again. The laughter came naturally, the connection undeniable. But then there were the bad days, the moments when the distance between us felt like a canyon. I'd try to initiate a conversation, only to be met with curt answers or distracted nods. Rachel spent more time than usual in her office, headphones on, claiming she was working on a new project. I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was avoiding me. One evening, I suggested we go for one of our usual walks in the park. Her response stung. "Not tonight," she said, barely looking up from her laptop. "Come on," I pressed. "It's been a while since we went. It'll be nice." She sighed, closing her laptop with an exaggerated snap. I said, "Not tonight, okay? Why do you have to push?" Her tone was sharper than I'd ever heard it. I raised my hands in surrender. "I just thought it'd be nice." "Forget I asked." She softened slightly, guilt flashing across her face. "Sorry. I didn't mean to snap. I'm just tired." "It's fine," I said, though it wasn't. Those moments of tension were becoming more frequent. And yet, neither of us seemed willing to address the growing cracks directly. Instead, we danced around them, each of us too afraid to rock the boat. I tried to make up for it by being extra attentive. I left little notes on her desk, small reminders that I cared. "Have a great day. Love you." I brought her coffee in the mornings, even when I didn't feel like getting out of bed myself. But her responses were lukewarm, her smiles fleeting. At night, the distance felt even more palpable. Rachel used to curl up next to me, her head on my chest as we talked about everything and nothing. Now, she stayed on her side of the bed, scrolling on her phone or reading a book until she turned off the light without a word. One night, I tried to bridge the gap. "Rachel, are we okay?" She paused, her fingers hovering over her phone screen. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," I said carefully. "You just seem off. Like something's bothering you." "I'm fine," she said quickly, too quickly. "You don't seem fine." She sighed, setting her phone down. "I don't know what you want me to say. Things have just been weird since you got back. I'm still adjusting, that's all." I nodded, though her answer didn't feel complete. "I just want to make sure we're okay." "We're fine," she said, forcing a smile. "Let's not make this a big thing." But it was a big thing, even if neither of us wanted to admit it. The good days continued to give me hope, little flashes of the life we'd built together. Like the time we spent an afternoon planting flowers in the garden, Rachel teasing me about my lack of gardening skills. "You're supposed to dig a hole, not a trench," she said, laughing as I struggled with the spade. "Hey, I'm just giving these flowers a fighting chance," I shot back, grinning. For a moment, it felt like nothing had changed. But the bad days loomed larger. The tension, the distance, the unspoken frustrations, they were building, layer by layer. And no matter how hard I tried to keep the balance, the seesaw always seemed to tilt the wrong way. When I saw the flyer pinned to the bulletin board at the grocery store, I wasn't sure why it caught my attention. Maybe it was the bold colors or the vintage-style illustrations of trapeze artists and clowns, but something about it made me stop and take a closer look. "The Grand Cirque," it read, "one night only." An idea sparked in my mind. Rachel and I hadn't done much together lately, certainly nothing fun or out of the ordinary. Maybe this could be the thing to break the cycle, to bring us back to ourselves. That evening, as we sat in the living room, her on the couch with her laptop and me flipping through a magazine, I broached the idea. "Hey, guess what's coming to town?" She looked up briefly, raising an eyebrow. "What?" "A circus," I said, holding up the flyer. "It's only here for one night. I thought it might be fun to check it out." Rachel hesitated, her expression unreadable. "A circus?" "Yeah," I said, trying to sound casual. "It could be fun. You know, something different. We haven't done anything like that in ages." For a moment, I thought she was going to turn me down, but then she gave a small nod. "Okay. Why not?" Her agreement felt like a small victory. The night of the circus, I could tell Rachel had made an effort. She wore a bright red scarf that matched the one she'd worn on our first date, and she'd even applied a touch of lipstick, something she hadn't done in weeks. I took it as a good sign. We arrived at the big top just as the sun was setting, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink. The atmosphere was electric, kids running around with cotton candy, the smell of popcorn in the air, and the faint strains of carnival music drifting from the tent. Inside, the seats were packed, the crowd buzzing with excitement. We found our spots near the middle, close enough to see the performers' faces but far enough to take in the whole spectacle. The show began with a flourish, acrobats twisting through the air, their movements defying gravity, followed by a dazzling light show. I glanced at Rachel, hoping to see her smiling, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she was. "Pretty amazing, huh?" I whispered. She nodded, her eyes glued to the performers. "Yeah, it is." For the first half of the show, it felt like we were on the same page again, sharing quiet laughter and occasional whispers as the acts unfolded. Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference. But halfway through, as the ringmaster introduced a clown act, Rachel's phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced at the screen, her smile fading. "I have to take this," she murmured, standing up and slipping past me. "Now?" I asked, frowning. "It's work," she said quickly. "I'll be right back." I watched her leave, her red scarf disappearing into the crowd. The clowns tumbled into the ring, their antics drawing laughter from the audience, but I couldn't focus. My eyes kept flicking to the entrance, waiting for Rachel to come back. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The clowns finished their act and were replaced by a group of fire jugglers, but there was still no sign of her. By the time the grand finale rolled around, a breathtaking display of trapeze artistry under a shower of glittering lights, my stomach was in knots. The performers soared through the air, the audience erupting into applause, but all I could think about was Rachel. When the show ended, and the crowd began to file out, I stayed seated, my heart pounding. "Excuse me, sir," an usher said gently. "The show's over." "I'm just waiting for someone," I said, my voice tight. But deep down, I knew she wasn't coming back. The crowd shuffled out of the tent, their faces alight with excitement from the evening's performance. I stood frozen in my seat, staring at the exit where Rachel had disappeared over an hour ago. I pulled out my phone and called her, my fingers trembling slightly. The line rang and rang before going to voicemail. I tried again. Nothing. It was strange, Rachel had been glued to her phone lately, answering texts and calls immediately, even during dinner. For her to ignore my calls now felt like a glaring anomaly. My worry grew with each passing second. Where could she have gone? Why wasn't she answering? I stepped out of the tent and scanned the bustling crowd, the carnival lights casting eerie shadows on the ground. "Rachel!" I called out, my voice swallowed by the noise of the crowd. When there was no answer, I started walking, my mind racing. I didn't have a destination in mind, I just followed my instincts, weaving through the maze of tents and booths. Bright colors and laughing faces blurred around me as I searched, my heart pounding in my chest. After what felt like an eternity, I turned a corner and came face to face with a small, unassuming tent. A hand-painted sign above the entrance read, "Grim Reaper." My breath hitched. Something about the name felt foreboding, but a deeper part of me, one that I couldn't explain, urged me to go inside. The tent was dimly lit, with a faint smell of incense hanging in the air. I heard voices, low and muffled, coming from behind a curtain at the back of the room. "Rachel?" I called out hesitantly. The voices stopped abruptly. My pulse quickened as I approached the curtain, my hand trembling as I pulled it aside. What I saw made my blood run cold. There she was, my wife, sitting on a low couch with the clown from earlier in the performance. His garish makeup was smeared, and their faces were inches apart. Her red scarf was draped over his lap, his hand resting on her thigh. They were kissing, her fingers tangled in his colorful wig. And it wasn't just a kiss. There was an intimacy between them that I recognized instantly, the kind that spoke of something far deeper than a passing moment. "Rachel?" My voice came out in a strangled whisper, barely audible over the pounding in my ears. They both looked up, their faces registering shock and then something else, guilt. The clown stumbled to his feet, his hands raised as if to placate me. "Hey, man, it's not what it looks like," he stammered, his painted face twisting into a sheepish grin. But I didn't care what it was or wasn't. The only thing I saw was red. Without thinking, I crossed the room in 2 strides and swung. My fist connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling against the couch. His wig flew off, landing on the floor in a tangled heap. Rachel gasped, standing up, but I didn't stop. "You think this is funny?" I growled, landing another punch squarely on his nose. His makeup smeared further, bright red streaks mixing with the trickle of blood now running down his face. "Stop!" Rachel shouted, grabbing my arm. "What are you doing?" I turned to her, my chest heaving, my vision blurred with anger and betrayal. "What am I doing?" "What are you doing, Rachel?" Her face crumpled, but she didn't answer. The clown groaned on the floor, clutching his face as he muttered something incoherent. I took a step back, the weight of what I'd just seen crashing down on me. The room spun, the scent of incense suddenly suffocating. Think about what you're going to say, I said coldly, my voice shaking. Because you're going to explain this when we get home. With that, I grabbed her arm, not forcefully, but firmly enough to leave no room for argument, and led her out of the tent. My world had shattered, but I wasn't ready to face it just yet. Not until I had answers. The drive home was suffocating. Rachel sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, her arms crossed tightly against her chest. I gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, the tension between us thick enough to choke on. Neither of us said a word. The only sound was the hum of the tires against the road and the occasional buzz of Rachel's phone, which she didn't bother to check. By the time we pulled into the driveway, my mind was a whirlwind of questions, accusations, and disbelief. I cut the engine and turned to her, my jaw tight. Inside, I said, my voice low but firm. Rachel hesitated, her hand on the door handle. For a moment, I thought she might run, but instead, she nodded and stepped out of the car. Inside the house, the familiar comfort of our shared space felt warped, as though the walls themselves knew what had happened. Rachel stood in the living room, her arms still crossed, her eyes fixed on the floor. Well? I demanded, breaking the silence. Are you going to say something, or do I have to spell it out for you? She flinched but didn't look up. Rachel, I said, my voice rising. I just caught you with another man. You don't get to stay quiet now. Finally, she looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Try the truth, I snapped. How long has this been going on? Who is he? It's not like that, she said, her voice trembling. Not like what? I barked. I saw you, Rachel. Don't insult me by pretending it's something it's not. Her shoulders slumped, and she sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. I didn't plan for this to happen, she said quietly. Then explain it to me, I said, pacing the room. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you threw away everything we built for a guy who wears clown shoes. She winced but didn't defend herself. It started when you were gone, she admitted after a long pause. Her voice was barely audible. I don't know why. I was lonely, I guess. Lonely? I repeated, my voice dripping with incredulity. We talked every day. I was working my tail off to build a future for us, and you were, what? Flirting with clowns? It wasn't like that at first, she said, tears streaming down her face. It was just harmless conversation. He was funny and kind, and he made me feel noticed. My chest tightened, anger and hurt warring within me. Noticed? Are you kidding me, Rachel? I noticed you every single day. I built my life around you. What more could you possibly need? I don't know, she cried, her voice cracking. I don't know why I did it. Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference. It just happened. The words hung in the air like a slap. How long? I asked coldly. She hesitated, wiping her eyes. A few weeks, she admitted. Since you came back. Since I came back? The room seemed to tilt. You've been seeing him this whole time? She nodded, her face crumpling with guilt. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. You didn't mean for it to go this far. Rachel, you kissed him. You let him. I stopped, the image of what I'd seen in that tent flashing in my mind like a cruel taunt. I'm sorry, she said, her voice breaking. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. I hate myself for it. Her words didn't soothe me. If anything, they fanned the flames of my anger. You don't get to play the victim here, I said, my voice cold. You made your choice, Rachel. You chose him. Over me. Over us. I didn't choose him, she said desperately. I chose wrong. I know that now. Please, can we fix this? Her plea caught me off guard, but I didn't soften. Not yet. I don't know, I said honestly. Right now, all I can see is what you've done. You've broken something, Rachel. And I don't know if it can be put back together. She buried her face in her hands again, her sobs filling the room. I stood there, staring at her, feeling a mix of fury, heartbreak, and betrayal that I couldn't untangle. This was the woman I'd built my life with, the person I'd trusted more than anyone. And now, she felt like a stranger. The silence stretched between us, heavy and unbearable. I'm going to bed, I said finally, my voice hollow. Think about what you're going to say tomorrow. Because I'm not doing this again. I turned and walked up the stairs, leaving Rachel alone in the darkness of the living room. The days that followed were a blur of tense conversations and crushing realizations. Rachel and I tried to talk, but every conversation ended in the same place, the betrayal, the lies, the unspoken question of why. She wanted to fix things, at least, that's what she said. But every time she apologized, it felt hollow, like she didn't fully grasp the magnitude of what she'd done. I'll do anything, she pleaded one evening, her voice trembling. Therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. I wanted to believe her, but how could I? The damage was too deep, the foundation of trust we'd built shattered beyond recognition. Rachel, I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt, I don't think this can be fixed. You made your choice, and I can't undo what I saw, what I feel. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't argue. Maybe she knew there was nothing left to say. The next morning, I called a lawyer. It was surreal, hearing the words come out of my mouth. I need to file for divorce. Saying it out loud made it real, but it also brought a strange sense of clarity. Rachel moved out that weekend. She stayed with a friend while we sorted through the logistics, who got what the timeline would look like. Packing her things was excruciating. Every item she took felt like a small piece of the life we'd built together being stripped away. The house, once filled with laughter and shared dreams, became unbearably quiet. I stayed up late most nights, replaying everything in my head, wondering where it all went wrong. Was it my fault? Should I have seen the signs earlier? Could I have done something, anything, to prevent this? The divorce process itself was surprisingly straightforward. We didn't have kids, and our finances were fairly simple to untangle. She didn't contest anything, and we both agreed to keep things as amicable as possible. But even as we signed the papers, there was an unspoken heaviness between us, a silent acknowledgement of what we'd lost. On the day the divorce was finalized, I expected to feel relief. Instead, I felt hollow. Rachel met me outside the courthouse, her face pale but composed. I'm sorry, she said softly. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. What was there to say? I'd already said it all. As I walked to my car, I glanced back one last time. She was standing there, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her, as if the weight of her choices had finally caught up to her. The drive home was quiet, the familiar streets blurring past me. When I pulled into the driveway, I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the house. It no longer felt like a home, just a place filled with memories that hurt too much to hold on to. In the weeks that followed, I started to rebuild. I took up hobbies I'd always been curious about, reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in years, and even started going to therapy to process everything. It wasn't easy, but slowly, the ache in my chest began to fade. Rachel reached out a few times, sending messages that ranged from apologies to tentative attempts at reconnection. I didn't respond. Some wounds are too deep to heal, and some chapters are meant to close. Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference.